Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to session 14, I believe, of the IFG Tafseer. We do a fortnightly tafsir based on obviously the Quran, but we try and do a business focused angle. And this is session 14. If you've never joined us before, then definitely do subscribe to our list so that you're in the loop about when these things are happening and you know when we're going live, so that you can join us and benefit, inshallah. So this week, we are going to have Ibrahim on live shortly in about 5 minutes, and it's all about the verse that forbids. Well, it talks about wine and gambling. So inshallah, we're in for a treat. But before that, I just wanted to update you guys on what we've been up to at IFG this week, in case you've not seen this content. So the first thing that we did this week was an article on Finispia. So if you've never heard of Finispia, they're an app which allows you to screen stocks and shares, and it basically gives you a result straight away and just says that this stock is halal or haram. Now, if you've been following us, you'll know that we talk a lot about shares and investments, and we've got our own article on how to screen for halal stocks. We've got our own course on how to manually screen them. But this is a kind of automated thing where you type in a ticker code. So for example, if it's I don't know, EasyJet, you'll type in EasyJet and it'll come up with a result and just tell you whether it's halal or haram. So the article is a complete review of the whole thing. I give it a full test drive, and do check that out. If Finispia is, it sounds like something that you're interested in, check out our review, see what you think. You might completely disagree with me as well if you check it out yourself. My broad summary is that it's really good to see this sort of thing happening in the Muslim space. There seems to be a lot of tech things that are happening now that are enabling Muslims and that are enabling lots of interesting choices that we just didn't have before. So it's really good to see things like Finispia popping up. You'll see in the review that there are things definitely that Finispia can work on, but I would definitely encourage you to A, check out the review, B, check out the website and kind of make your own mind up and see if you like the sound of it, then definitely go for it, inshallah. The second thing that we did this week was the weekly release of our podcast. And this week's podcast was with Talha, who is the founder of an app which you might well have heard of. It's called the Quran Club. And obviously, we're in the month of Ramadan. We should all be reading lots of Quran, hopefully, although, first reminder to myself, which I've been very lax on Quran, maybe I need to download the Quran Club app ASAP. So the Quran Club is all about using the kind of the world that we have as Muslims, and that's all been enabled by tech, to be able to join us as a community and actually be able to participate in essentially a social good of participating in shared Quran reading. And you can do lots of interesting things with it, like share it with your friends and family, participate in khatam of Quran together and stuff like that. So it's really good. You can share different portions of the Quran to read and things like that. So definitely check out the podcast. You'll understand a lot about the founder himself from the podcast and what his motivations were behind doing the Quran Club app and why he's done it and what the app is all about. And you might as well give it a try. There's nothing to lose. They've had many hundreds of thousands of downloads, so you won't be the first one to be downloading. So definitely do give the Quran Club app a try. And the third thing, the last thing that we did this week, the latest thing I should say, is a Zakat guide on investments. And we did this primarily for ourselves, actually, because we, alhamdulillah, as our lives carry on and as we get older and as we increase our assets and we diversify our portfolios into lots of different things, what we find is that Zakat is a very, very tricky topic. How do you deal with zakat on your workplace pension, or how do you deal with zakat on the stocks and shares that you hold in your ISA, or things like that. So what we did was we compiled research and compiled the opinion that we follow in house, and we've come up with a really, really simple guide, alhamdulillah. Hopefully will be very, very beneficial. You can get that by subscribing to our mailing list or dropping us a line. Mohsin at islamicfinanceguru.com, Ibrahim at islamicfinanceguru.com if you want a copy of it. We've designed it to be really super, super simple. So we'll discuss specifically things to do with investments. So we talk about property. What do you do with, everyone knows pretty much that you don't pay zakat on the own property that you have in terms of the house that you live in, but what do you do about any buy-to-lets that you've got? Or what if you've got an ex-wife, for example, who you have a house for her? What do you do about the zakat on that? What do you do about zakat on your pension? What do you do about zakat on shares? And what do you do about zakat on funds and things like that? And there are a number of opinions about all of this, but what we've done is compiled our view that we've come to, and there are multiple opinions on all of these things, but we have an opinion, and we've compiled that in this guide, and we've given some really clear, quite simple examples as well. Alhamdulillah, the feedback's been really good. The feedback's been that people haven't seen this kind of thing being done before in such a concise and precise fashion. So hopefully that will be of benefit of you. So if you do want that, just drop us a line, mohsin@islamicfinanceguru.com or ibrahim@islamicfinanceguru.com, and just put in the subject zakat guide, and just mention that you want it, and we'll send it over, inshallah. So I'm going to pass over to Ibrahim, and you're in for a treat because Ibrahim's particularly well dressed today. He's in some very dapper religious gear. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, by the way, make sure you check out the final YouTube video, because I'm sure you'll want to see Ibrahim. Ibrahim, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone. Mohsin, thank you very much for. I feel like you're the in comedy shows, you've got the guy who warms a crowd up and just gets them all riled up. So I have the sense that you've just done that with your crazy stories about Finisphere and life, the universe, and everything. I basically just telling our audience we're live now, just to let everyone know, in case they've missed it. But I think we're done. Okay, so we've had actually a question on the YouTube from a brother who was asking about whether or not Forex was halal, and I suppose the answer in a nutshell is that we view Forex as not permissible, and there's actually an article that we've done on it, and perhaps Mohsin, at some point you can share it in the chat as we're progressing. So definitely check that out. But the basic reason why Forex we regard it as impermissible is for a number of reasons. On the retail Forex spectrum, so we're contrasting between institutions who deal in currency versus us guys, retail, ordinary people who deal in Forex online, and the adverts that you see. So we're talking specifically about retail. With institutional Forex, there's certain different rules that might be applicable. On the retail side of things, key reason why it's not permissible is because there is a leverage involved, and the way to construe it is manyfold. You can look at it in many ways, but the key reason why leverage is not permissible is because it would look like brokers are extending you a loan in order for you to buy from them, and as a result of that, they get the spread. And so what is going on here is, in essence, a loan is being given, and for that they're going to get back more than the loan, and that's problematic. Now, that's under one construction. The other problem is that you're not actually necessarily dealing directly in currencies. A lot of these Forex platforms are actually just spread betting and CFD platforms. And we know that that's not permissible in Islam. And actually, we're going to talk about some of the reasons why it's not permissible when we talk about the global financial crisis, and what that has to say about everything, and what link that has to today's tafsir as well. So do watch out for that. But yeah, in a nutshell, Forex is not permissible, but do check out the article for details on it.
I've put that article on now, by the way, but there are also some others, and if you click that one, and then if you read that, I'm sure it'll suggest some other Forex ones that we've written. And if it doesn't, then just search. There's a search facility on our website, and just type in Forex, and it will come up, inshallah.
And Jazakallah khair to Brother Raza for his compliment on the hat. There's actually a secret to this hat, and that is, well, there's two things. One is because it's Ramadan, so I thought, you have to step up the game a bit. And the other is that I've not had a haircut, so that's the secret. So there's another comment. Is there a difference of opinion that you are aware of regarding the permissibility of Forex, or from your own research, you've seen all scholars view it as impermissible to? I think from what I've seen, I've seen a very, very tiny minority of scholars who ever said that Forex is permissible. And I think they've only said that because they have not fully been availed of the facts of the situation. Like if someone goes to a scholar who doesn't know anything about Forex and says, can I trade currency online? And I will pay dollars and I will get back Swiss francs or whatever the case might be. The scholar who doesn't have any background in this area will say, well, yeah, that sounds fine. So it's that kind of scholar, very tiny minority that I've seen who might see it as permissible, but all of the mainstream scholars that I know have not seen this as something that is permissible. So I would stay away. Okay, Siraj, Jazakallah khair for your comment. It seems like we're going to get eventually to the tafsir, but this is an interesting comment. Mohsin, what are your thoughts on this as well? How can one calculate zakat for crypto assets like Bitcoin and other tokens, same like shares? This is a fascinating question. We've actually got an article on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as well, and how you model them. And it comes down to essentially whether or not you're modeling them as currency or assets. And if you're modeling them as currency, then you just apply the 2.5% on that. If you're modeling them as assets, then it depends on how and why you're holding those cryptocurrency or bitcoins. I mean, Bitcoin is very much going to be just for investment, but there could be other cryptocurrencies that have usufruct in of themselves. So what I mean by that is you could have cryptocurrencies or blockchain technologies where you have these tokens that might actually form the operations of a business. I mean, I don't know what that is. I'm not conversant too much on blockchain and cryptocurrency as an industry, but I do know that there's now a whole range of coin offerings and other kind of blockchain technologies where the token isn't just currency, it's actually something much more significant than that. And thinking about it from a share perspective, when a company has liquid assets, that's the thing that you pay zakat on. And when a company has illiquid assets, i.e. machinery or the tools of the trade that they use to actually carry out their business, that is not something that you pay zakat on. And so if the cryptocurrency is just being used as an investment, and by and large the majority of people will be using it as such, then you would pay zakat on the entire amount because that's the entire liquid amount. Whereas if, as I was talking about earlier, you have certain tokens or blockchain technologies where they are not being used as investment and they're actually part of the business of whatever it is you're engaging in, then you wouldn't pay zakat on that. But yeah, in a nutshell, pay zakat on cryptocurrencies by and large for the entire amount, 2.5%. Okay, cool. Let's dive into the tafsir for today. So inshallah, we're going to be looking today at Surah Baqarah verses 219 and the start of 220. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ويسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما ويسألونك ماذا ينفقون قل العفو كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات لعلكم تتفكرون في الدنيا والآخرة. They ask you about wine and gambling. Say in them, They ask you about wine and gambling, say in them is great sin and yet some benefit for people, but their sin is greater than their benefit. And they ask you what they should spend, say the excess. So say al-af, the thing that is excess of needs and beyond needs. And thus Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's making clear to you the verses that you might give thought, and then to this world and the hereafter. So you're giving thought to this world and the hereafter. So this is a verse that is talking very specifically about two of the sin industries, if you want to call them that. It's talking about wine and gambling. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He isn't banning, interestingly, He isn't banning wine and gambling in this particular verse. That is actually going to happen much later on, or not necessarily much later on, but that's going to happen later on in a different verse, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He reveals the verses in Surah Ma'idah, where He says that the alcohol and the gambling, ansab, rijsum min amal shaitan, are from the abominations of shaitan, are from the handiwork of shaitan, and you should avoid it. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَنْ يُوقِعَ بَيْنَكُمُ الْعَدَاوَةَ وَالْبَغْضَاءَ فِي الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ وَيَصُدَّكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَعَنِ الصَّلَاةِ فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in this verse, Shaitan wants you to excite enmity and hatred between you with these intoxicants and gambling, and hinder you from the remembrance of Allah and from as-salah. So will you not then abstain? So that is the clarification there, that this is something that is not liked. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he was the one who actually asked for clarification. So he got these further verses that were revealed. One that was said, that was saying, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. O you who believe, don't approach salah when you are drunk. And of course, this was a stepping stone, because Muslims pray 5 times a day. I mean, if you're drunk, you're basically going to really struggle to fulfill your 5 daily prayers. So that was a stepping stone. And then finally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He banned alcohol in its entirety. Now, in terms of what we want to talk about today, there are really 3 key things. The first is that there's a really important principle that underlies the banning of alcohol and gambling, and that is when harm outweighs good, avoid it. And the second section to this tafsir, inshallah, will be about talking around the principle of spending the excess and how we actually can give charity, and perhaps how we can give charity more effectively and how we can give charity in a more impactful way. And then finally, we'll talk about the links between the 2 bits of the verse as well, and how the ban on alcohol and gambling links to the teachings on charity. So let's whiz through quickly the fiqhi background on this verse. So with alcohol, we all know that there is actually some benefit to alcohol. So we see stories on the BBC and various newspapers regularly about how having a pint of whatever, or a glass of wine a night or a week, is actually somehow beneficial to some extent. And we know even anecdotally that, you know, having alcohol is like a social lubricant. So there is some kind of basic benefit from that. We know alcohol can act as a antibacterial. We know that people are given certain kinds of alcohol to bring them around. You know, in old-fashioned stories, you hear about how people pass out and then they're given a little bit of something strong to, you know, wake them up again. So that there's all of these kind of benefits to alcohol, and we know that it's something that brings together you know, non-Muslim communities around alcohol. So there are benefits to alcohol, but then there are huge and very, very, very significant harms to alcohol. So the majority of people that you see on A&E on the Friday and Saturday nights are related to alcohol injuries, and there are so many complications. Wider NHS is suffering from because of alcohol. So it's not just the immediate injuries that take place, but it's also the long-term impacts that you see from you know, damage to liver and all sorts of other related medical illnesses that come from excess consumption of alcohol. In fact, Imam Shafi'i has a fascinating shi'r about this. He says, ثلاث هن مهلكة الأنام وداعية الصحيح إلى السقام دوام مدامة ودوام وطء وإدخال الطعام على الطعام. So he says that there are three things that are the callers of the healthy people to sickness. So there's three things that cause people to get sick. And what are they? دوام مدامة ودوام وطء. He says that it's the persistent and becoming addicted to alcohol and just regularly drinking alcohol, ودوام وطء, and being obsessed and being addicted to sexual desires, وإدخال الطعام على الطعام, and entering food upon food on your in your belly. And that's quite pertinent, I suppose, for our time as well, with Ramadan and with iftar coming up. So Mohsin, I don't want you gobbling down any more samosas than you need to.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you over. I was just watching YouTube recipe videos on the side. So
fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Okay, so let's carry on. So that's in a nutshell, the problem with alcohol, which is that there is a huge harm there, but that there is benefit there as well. And wherever the harm outweighs the benefit, then that is something that we should be avoiding. That isn't in itself, by the way, something that is haram. So like, you can think of things where ultimately the harm outweighs the benefit, but the thing itself isn't made haram. So for example, I would say eating, Mohsin, can you think of any examples? I was thinking of obese people and eating ice cream, for example, or things of that nature, where there is clearly more harm than good here, but ultimately this is not something that is forbidden. So
yeah, what things like I think there might be various opinions on this, but things like jumping out of a plane, for thrill sports kind of stuff.
Interesting. Yeah. I can see how that could fall into that, very much so. And if you guys can think of any, then flag them up. But from a basic understanding and a basic bit of time thinking about it, I couldn't think of a huge amount, but I think that there are a few where you can get the benefit to actually be less than the harm, but overall it's not actually still forbidden. But where there is more harm than benefit, we certainly should be very, very careful of it, and we should be avoiding it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is what he says in the Quran.
You could argue that risky investments fall into this category, i.e. that they're halal, but
yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah.
So startup investing, for example, that you are probably going to lose your money, but 1 out of 10 is going to do so well that it's going to recoup the lot. There is a possibility of that.
Yeah, agreed. Now, let's go back to the verse itself. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is saying that in it that there is a great sin. So he doesn't actually say darar necessarily, which is, the principle that we're talking about is where the harm outweighs the benefit, and that is the thing that you should be avoiding. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he actually uses specifically where the sin is greater than فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما. The sin outweighs the benefit. So there is a slight distinction between sin and darar. But that is a distinction that we should remember, that in the sense that alcohol and khamr are sins, and that's why independent of even if they were really, really beneficial, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is saying that they would be forbidden. Having said that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is also making that analogy between the opposites. So sin is the opposite of benefit. and that means that sin in itself is harmful, it's intrinsically harmful. And there are two ways of analyzing that. Ultimately, if we look at it from a holistic perspective on the timeline, then if we are going to all die and go to either heaven or hell, then on that time frame, of course, sin is going to be very harmful for us. But even on a shorter time frame, then we can see how sinning is actually things that are actually genuinely harmful for us. So, for example, having alcohol or gambling, or engaging in premarital relations, and dealing in drugs, for example. All of these things are fundamentally undermining of the social fabric that makes a happy, successful, and prospering society. And so there is that really strong link between sin and darar, and harm, and that's something that is brought out by this verse as well. And then gambling really is the same thing, and we're going to go into that when we talk about the story of the verse. And maybe Mohsin, I can call on you to talk about the global financial crisis, and explain how this whole thing came about, and the securitization bit of it. But let's not do that straight away. Right now, all I want to say about gambling is, of course, the same is the case, in that there is benefit to it. You will enjoy yourself. You might take a lot of pleasure. I mean, we've all seen the movies where people are gambling away, and there's a lot. It seems like a lot of fun, right? But then ultimately, there is a really dark underbelly to this whole thing, and it is causing many people a lot of not only financial distress, but also mental distress. Families break down, and there are really significant problems that are associated with gambling. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has banned both of these things because of this very simple principle. Let's move now on to how this is actually practically applicable for us, because you guys might be sat there thinking, hang on a second, I don't drink alcohol, I don't gamble, happy days. I am absolutely smashing this out of the park. This verse, this is the verse that gives me the right to look at other people and think, you should sort yourselves out, because I'm doing it. Now, that's not the best approach to take with the Quran, full stop. This is something that we should always be very cognizant of and careful of, in that when the Quran is talking about things, we should think about how that applies to us and how we can make ourselves better. Now, this verse is saying, فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that in alcohol there is benefit, but the sin and the harm is worse, and so therefore you should avoid it. And the same analysis could go for someone who is working at a bank, for example, where you will all have heard of people who work at a bank, or work in your wine warehouse, or they work in Bet365, or you see people, Muslims, who are serving alcohol, who are running restaurants where they serve alcohol. And their whole analysis is that, well, ultimately this is overall, it's beneficial. I give my sadaqah, I give my zakat, I go on Hajj, and this restaurant is allowing me to employ a load of people, and that benefits the community. I bring employment and prosperity, and because of my position in society, I can influence local councillors and get things sorted on that side of things. And this is actually really beneficial. And the banker says, me as a banker, I am at the hub of global finances, and so you need Muslims involved in that, and I can really influence the way that Muslims are viewed in this world, in this financial world, and I can perhaps become a role model for further people to come into this industry, and I can provide a load of benefit to Muslims by just having that intel about how one goes about financing projects and how one goes about building businesses using leverage. Now, the problem with this kind of analysis, and by the way, this will apply to pretty much any career where ultimately we all know it's haram. the ultimate problem with this analysis is that they're looking at the nafr, they're looking at the benefit, and they're ignoring the sin, they're ignoring the harm. And when the benefit is this much and the harm is that much, and you're focusing on the benefit, you're fooling yourself. You're fooling yourself and yourself alone. You're not fooling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're not fooling anyone else, quite frankly. It's just a story that we are telling ourselves about this stuff. And this verse is talking about khamr and maisir, alcohol and gambling. But actually, this is something that is really applicable to us as well.
Another interesting way to think about this, I was thinking, is the concept of risk and reward. So anyone who, I mean, it's a concept of life, but seeing as this is a business-focused tafsir, you can apply that to investing as well. So risk and reward is something we all think about when we invest, right? So when we invest in like a property, for example, you'll say, okay, what's the potential risk here? Well, in a property, it's very minimal risk, and the reward tends to be relatively decent. So you think, okay, good, that sounds interesting, sounds good, I'm going to go for that. And then on the flip side, you've got things like, really what they call penny shares, for example, very, very risky. But the reward is potentially very, very high. Now, the chances of you getting that reward and the chances of you picking the right stock in that sphere, because the vast majority of them are duds, then you are basically, your risk reward ratio is out of sync, because you're taking on a lot of risk, and the reward that you're going to get, if it's right, is very high, but the chance of it being right are very, very low. So actually, you're taking on a lot of risk, and this, in a way, speaks to this verse where you've got some potential good in it, but the harm probably outweighs the good, depending on the approach that you're taking. So a lot of people take a quite sporadic approach to this sort of thing. So I'm not talking about people that are kind of well researched and doing it in a very reasoned way, but trading stocks is another example where people willy-nilly just kind of like buy something on a whim, and there the harm outweighs the good, it seems to me.
Yeah, and I think that's true, and I think there's maybe not right now, but there is something to be perhaps covered by IFG about comparing people who even do gambling, essentially spread betting, in a very sophisticated way, where due to the law of averages and the way they've set up their models, they actually ultimately are profitable, net profitable on this on these platforms. I actually have a friend who makes computer models that people can use to trade. There's this syndicate that used to trade this with spread betting and online gambling, and this computer software enables them to actually make a lot of profit. But ultimately, this is still impermissible, because and this goes to the second reason why gambling is impermissible. So gambling is impermissible, of course, because of this reason, that is, the benefit will be less than the harm, because the harm will always be greater with gambling. But as we said in the start, that principle alone is not the reason why things become haram. There is a second reason why gambling is haram, and that is that it's a zero-sum game. Someone ends up losing in gambling. And the other problem here is that it's not really a contract where you're having an exchange over an item. What is going on here is that you're betting someone that this horse is going to win. And as a result of that, you're going to give me £10 for my £1 that I've bet. And what you're trading here is the chance of that horse winning. And that is not something that is tangible, and it's not something that is certain. It's not something that is very concrete or fixed until the point when the horse actually wins or loses the race. So it's something that the Sharia does not like at all, because of the uncertainty around it, and because of the problems with the underlying asset not being a tangible asset. So, but yeah, without going too much into that side of things, that's another reason why gambling will be impermissible. I want to talk quickly about Hajj and why I think possibly there is something to be said about applying this principle to Hajj as well. So with Hajj, we know that millions of people go to Hajj every year. Maybe about 5-6 million people. I might be wrong. Mohsin, correct me if that sounds off to you. And yeah, you say something.
I think it probably sounds about right. I think it might be about 4-ish million, to be
Right.
fair. But yeah, it's not wildly off.
Yeah. So it's
Might
not like
might be more now.
yeah, let's say 5-6 million. I mean, that goes against that goes for my argument, and it's still so 5-6 million people are doing Hajj every year, and there's 1.2 billion Muslims in the world that need to do Hajj, and of course, a lot of them will have either done Hajj or they won't have the money that makes Hajj obligatory upon them. But every year, Hajj is massively oversubscribed. And there's also a massive climate change impact when someone flies across and does Hajj and spends money and, all of the waste that's created as a result of that. So there's two harms there. There's the climate change harm, and there's the point that you are potentially taking up the space of someone else who actually needs to do Hajj. And so there could be an analysis made here where you say that actually going on Hajj for someone who's already done Hajj may actually be more harmful than beneficial in some ways. Now, I'm not going to be making a definitive statement here, by the way. I'm not saying don't go on Hajj if you've already been on Hajj. I know there are scholars who have actually passed verdicts along those lines. And I actually think that is a very sensible and reasonable position to hold. But I don't want to say, emphatically that you shouldn't go on a second Hajj if that's absolutely something that you really want to do. But I would say that I wouldn't do that. I think that ultimately there's too much harm for me in my head to be able to make that decision.
The other interesting point on the Hajj thing is that my understanding is that the Saudi government have now introduced a tax or a levy or an additional charge if you've been on Hajj or Umrah in the last, I'm not sure, but I think it might be like 5 or 10 years or whatever,
Right.
then you have to pay an additional charge when you get your visa. And I think for Umrah, I heard recently that somebody went and had to pay, I think it was just over £400 additional. So interesting that the Saudi government are now kind of trying to really introduce that disincentive, financial disincentive,
Yeah.
that goes to that point, really.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean that makes sense then. I mean that's the fact that they're doing it and they actually have access to the data suggests that they know how under stress the whole system is as a result of that. I want to wrap up the talking about gambling and alcohol by really focusing on the gambling side of things and thinking about the global financial crisis, because ultimately, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He bans things, He says, don't do it. There really is a deep wisdom here. There really is. And the global financial crisis was this wisdom writ large, in that if we rewind back to 2007, 2008, and we think about the origins of the global financial crisis, this global financial crisis was ultimately caused by people lending out mortgages to people who should not have had those mortgages, and then taking those mortgages, packaging them up, slicing them up, and selling them on to various banks, who would then potentially slice them up even further, package them up into various other products, and then sell them on further, until eventually these mortgages were found, with investors globally. So, it might have been a mortgage given in Wisconsin in the USA, but someone in Germany or Tokyo was holding it. And so let's talk about the benefits that came from it, from this whole operation. The benefit was someone got a house out of it. The benefit was that when the sales of these mortgages took place, someone got a profit. Many people got a profit out of it. It helped the economy grow for at least for that time period, because people were like, this is a gravy train and it's never going to end. There was a benefit to securitization in that the risk of holding that mortgage was spread between lots of different people. There was, the benefit of the economy as a whole growing as a result of this activity. So this was absolutely fantastic. But the problem was there was a great harm, and people had not been focusing on that harm. And the harm was that there was a huge amount of uncertainty attached to this whole operation. The people that they were lending to should not have been getting those loans, because they were people who were extremely high risk individuals in terms of their credit history. There was a massive risk of contagion. So when you spread the risk between everyone, and one of the dominoes falls early on down the chain, that has a massive impact on the rest of the chain as well. So when that Wisconsin individual defaulted on his mortgage, the guy in Tokyo and the guy in Germany and the guy in the UK, all of them felt the effects of that. And as a result of this, as a result of the debts going bad, the entire financial system was essentially teetering at an edge. The USA literally spent trillions rescuing their financial system. They bailed out Freddie Mae, Fannie Mac, I think they're called. They bailed out Bear Stearns, but I think that ultimately collapsed or merged. Lehman Brothers was allowed to collapse. Goldman Sachs had to have a massive cash injection in order to stay afloat. It is now coming out actually that the Federal Reserve opened up a credit line to a whole bunch of global investors in order to keep the markets cool, and in order to keep people from overreacting and from market turmoil. And they actually loaned out in the tune of literally hundreds of billions of dollars in order to maintain all of this stuff. And that's not to say anything about the harm of a decade of lost growth as a result of this, and the rise of the far right and Donald Trump and all of the the right wing that we've seen rising, the austerity in the UK. All of this is linking back to this problem that we highlighted at the start, which is the problem of securitization and dealing in derivatives, and that comes back down to the verse itself about gambling.
The other thing to add here is that if viewers or listeners are interested in the origins of the financial crisis and the kind of story behind all of that, there's a really good book, and it got made into a film actually, which many of you might have seen, called The Big Short. So definitely recommend giving that a read or a watch. Obviously not in Ramadan, but it follows basically people that were predicting that this was all a bubble and it was going to crash. And it really goes into the reasons why it all crashed, and it's really helpful from a non kind of economist or non-specialist point of view to really understand what was going on and how people were on that gravy train, as Ibrahim put it. But there were some other people that were kind of predicting and seeing objectively that this was a gravy train that was going to end.
Agreed. And sadly it did end, and we're all facing the results of that. I genuinely think that because we're talking about what could have been, we will never really know, but we as a human race have suffered as a result of the global financial crisis, the austerity, the credit crunch, the job losses, the fiscal tightening, the tightening of the social security benefits that people get, the increase in the burden the taxpayer had to pay as a result of the financial system. These are real tangible benefits, tangible harms that came as a result of these actions. Let's now talk about the second part of this verse, which is talking about charity. So the people, they ask, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا يُنْفِقُونَ? They ask, what should they be spending? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, قُلِ الْعَفْ, spend from the excess, spend from what is in excess of your needs. So Al-Hakam said that, Mixam said that, Ibn Abbas said that this ayah means that whatever you can spare above the needs of your family is what is being got to here. So whatever is above the needs of your family, that is the thing that you should be spending from. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you spend the entire amount, but you may well do if you want to do that. Abu Hurairah said that a man said, "O Messenger of Allah, I have a dinar." And the Prophet said, "Spend it on yourself." And he said, "I have another dinar." And he said, "Spend it on your wife." And he said, "I have another dinar." And he said, "Spend it on your offspring." And he said, "I have another dinar." This man had a lot of single dinars. And he said, "You have better knowledge about this," meaning how and where you should spend this in charity. So this is in Muslim, and this is a nice hadith that kind of outlines our list of priorities when it comes to spending. So the first thing we should be spending on is ourselves, and making sure that we are healthy and adequately clothed, etc. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that spend it on your family. And then He says spend it on your offspring. So your wife and then your offspring. And then He says spend it on other people after that. So there is a gradation here that we should be respecting when we spend. Often what happens is that we as a community are pulled in by the adverts and pulled in by the social discourse around us, and we skip over ourselves. We skip over, to be honest, we don't really skip over ourselves. We skip over our families, our extended families, our children, and we go straight to a well in Africa or the Far East or wherever it might be. And this is actually not, in my view, being true to the order of priority when it comes to charity that Islam has set out. And we should be very cognizant of that and very aware of that. We have people who give a huge amount to charity, and yet their close family or extended family are living in poverty. That just doesn't make any sense, because you're going to be responsible and asked about your family and your close ones before anyone else on the Day of Judgment. And so you should be prioritizing that as much as you possibly can. And now, Mohsin, I want to talk about how we can potentially spend on the Muslim community, helping the Muslim community, but in a more efficient and impactful way. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this as well, about how we can be more strategic about giving our charity. And I was thinking about this, and I'm just going to think aloud here, because my thoughts on this are not entirely formed, but I think this is a nice forum to discuss this. And that's that if you give charity, let's say you give £1,000, and you give that over to the charity, and then that charity spends it on a well in Africa, and approximately £70 of your £1,000 will actually get to that well in Africa. The rest will be spent in actually getting the money over and the logistics, etc. Now, if you had spent that £1,000 on investing, for example, in a Muslim business in the UK, and you got money from that, you got regular money as a result of that, and you continued reinvesting that money into this Muslim business, for example, and this Muslim business grew, and this Muslim business hires other Muslims. It serves the needs of the wider community. It doesn't necessarily just, it's not a Muslim business based in Spark Hill or Ilford Lane, and it just serves the Muslim community. It could be an outward facing business itself. And that itself has a good da'wah impact, right? So if you've got a really welcoming, I don't know, takeaway owner who is also obviously a very practicing Muslim, then that has a really big impact on that local community. Or if he, for example, is set up in an area where there's lots of non-Muslims, where they're interacting with him day to day. And so you've got that whole impact side of things as well. And then eventually this individual, he sells his stake in this business and he reaps back, let's say, £5,000, and all of the income that that he's got at the same time as well is wrapped into this £5,000. And then he deploys that again into another 2 or 3 businesses, and he continues doing that. So in other words, what I'm getting at here is that his money for charity, which was £1,000, was has been consistently deployed within the Muslim community. Now that money is ultimately his, right? That money is ultimately his ownership. And the thing with giving charity is that money is no longer yours. That money becomes the property of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, if this person ultimately then writes a will and bequeaths his whatever earnings he makes from this donation pot of his, let's say it mushrooms from 5,000 to 20,000 over the course of his lifetime, and he bequeaths all of this to charity. Let's say he bequeaths it to a trust, a waqf that is set up to help deal with social issues in the Muslim community, help deal with encouraging entrepreneurship in the Muslim community, help deal with the really poor people in the Muslim community, and a whole host of other academia, research. So there's this waqf that's been set up, and ultimately his bequeathal upon his death is going to this waqf. To my mind, I think this is just so much more impactful than just giving £1,000 in charity. Am I missing something here, Mohsin?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking as you were talking that there's 2 things that I was thinking about. One is that you talked before about the kind of order of priority, and you talked about ourselves, our family, our extended family. And when we think about charity, we think a lot about poverty for obvious reasons. We are kind of conditioned to think that way. And this isn't, by the way, in any way kind of disparaging that whole effort. That is a really, really important effort to help people that are very, very poor in continents like Africa and so on. But thinking about that family angle, one of the things that you'll know this, Ibrahim, from conversations that we've had, but one of the things that I really want to do for my kids, for example, is when they're about, I don't know, 10, 12, 14, whatever it is, depending on the abilities that they're showing, and it's up to us to kind of recognize that, is to actually back them with money and be able to really propel them to do something that's going to be impactful and important. So, for example, using your business analogy, if I knew that one of my children was demonstrating, some good entrepreneurial traits, it would be incumbent upon me, I think, to back them with, I don't know, 10 grand and say, I don't know, do something online or offline or whatever it is and help them. And hopefully that mushrooms into something. So that's one thing. The other thing that I was thinking about was we should be actively looking at and getting out there and networking so that we understand what sorts of projects people are doing out there in our local community, because only then will we actually appreciate what there is within our vicinity that we can donate money to that are good causes. And there's a good example of this. I was listening to the Ilm Feed podcast, which is a really good podcast, by the way, which I recommend that all our audience listens to. And one of the recent ones at the time of recording this was one with Sheikh Hassan Ali. And he's got his Safar Academy in London, and as part of that, he has designed some a series of books, and the books are designed to kind of plug in the gaps between what you get taught at home and what you get taught in the madrasa by teachers and so on. And it's designed to be a kind of really fun, engaging way of educating children, not just educating children actually. I'm told, well, he mentioned in the podcast that some adults have learned from these books as well. And charitable projects like that are, in my opinion, just as deserving, if not more deserving, of our money than just sending it off to some faceless organization that, yes, they may do some really good work, but I just feel that we need to just take a bit more of an effort to understand what's going on around us so that we can actually understand what impact we can have through our money.
Completely agree with that. Completely agree. I'm actually working on an article at the moment that I want to, inshallah, release at some point. And my thoughts on this are not fully set, but it just seems to me that there are people who have money, i.e., us individuals, and then there are ways that we can deploy that money. So this is the other side. So people who have money and people essentially that need money, or ways that we can deploy that money. And there are various intermediaries that sit in the middle between the two things that can arbitrate or that can funnel the money from one to the other. Now, in the economy at large, we have primarily financial institutions who serve that purpose. So you have insurers, you have banks. They will take your money and then they will invest that money, or they will deploy that money elsewhere. And then you also have charities, and you have the government as well. So all of these people take money and then they deploy it using their measurements. Now, out of all of those options, we as a Muslim community, we are spending approximately anywhere between 600 million to £1 billion a year on charity. That's how much we're giving in charity. I mean, that's a phenomenal amount of money. In Ramadan alone, 100 million will be raised for charity in the UK. That's a crazy statistic if we think about it. About £400 will be given by each person annually, and that adds up to like £38 per, I think, minute it was that it came to. So these are huge numbers that the Muslim community is giving to charity. But out of this range of people that can intermediate between money and people who need money, charity, quite frankly, is and charities, quite frankly, are possibly the least efficient and least, I would say, least efficient way of doing that, because there is no obviously profit motive, and there's no real oversight. So the last time that you gave that £5 in the mosque bucket, or in Liverpool Street when you gave some money into the collection bucket, when was the last time you then followed up and checked out the Mary Curie website and saw where that £1 had got to? How do you even know that person was even collecting from Mary Curie? I'm sure they were, right? I'm sure they were, and I'm sure that it went to good. But there is that lack of oversight there with the charity. And that isn't the case with the other bunch of options that you have to funnel your money through and give it to the causes that are needed. Now, all of this, by the way, is not for me to say that you shouldn't give charity. I think that there's two things that I'm kind of coming down upon. And one is that I think charities just need to really think a lot more carefully about the impact that they want to have, and the impact that they want to have locally in the UK as well. And of course, we know that NZF, National Zakat Foundation, are a fantastic organization who do spend money locally. So we really like them as a result of that. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that we as a community need to think about creating institutions like Awqaf and other charitable trusts that not just help people abroad, but also are very strategic and very overarching in their vision for the needs of the Muslim community right here, right now. It just boggles my mind sometimes that we give so much money abroad to these to charities that are sending it abroad, and yet organizations that are fighting against Islamophobia, discrimination, that are helping refugees settle in the UK, that are helping victims of domestic violence and sexual violence in the UK are struggling here in the UK, and all of that money is unfortunately going abroad. And it just seems to me that there's a misallocation going on. And let me just again reiterate that I'm not saying do not give charity abroad. I mean, I do that myself still. What I'm saying is that we just need to finesse the way we do that, and the amount that we allocate abroad. So I think that really is us done for the day, Mohsin, unless you have any other thoughts or any ideas to share with people.
No, not really. I just wanted to share one point actually, which was that um, speaking of kind of local projects, I'm aware of one project locally that helps. It's a Muslim guy that kind of leads it, and it deals with homelessness, basically, not kind of Muslim focus. But I heard recently that as a result of his kind of efforts and stuff like that, he's actually got a team of people working with him now that are not Muslims as a whole. So there are Hindus, there are Christians, there are atheists or whatever. And I was thinking, actually, what an amazing way of giving dawah. Just actually heading up an organization, doing something about a problem which we all know about. Homelessness is a real problem now in the UK, and leading a team behind you that isn't fully Muslim. What an impactful way of giving dawah. I mean, there will be people in that team that are Hindu, Christian, whatever, that probably have not had an interaction with a Muslim before, at close quarters. And if you're being led by a Muslim that's doing such inspiring work, of course your perception of Islam is going to be a positive one. There's just no two ways about it. So I just wanted to share that as an example of a project that I'm aware of. And you know what? There'll be loads of that going on around the UK, and we should absolutely be plugged in locally, so that we, first of all, that we know about these projects, and secondly, support them in any way you can. If it's not money, then time or your expertise.
No, I agree, Jazakallah khair. And that last point that you just made about time, I think that's so actually really important. In that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that I have inna Allah ashtara min al-mu'minina anfusahum wa amwalahum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that he's bought from the believers themselves and their wealth. Bi anna lahumul jannah, and for them there is Jannah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's making the distinction between just wealth and also ourselves, our efforts, our bodies, our time, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this context, he's talking about, actually fighting and, fighting for the truth and for, in self-defense or for peace, etc. And in our context, this looks like us investing our time and effort into these ventures. And it means that we need to be super efficient and impactful about the way we are deploying our time. Because if we are deploying our time as a charitable means as well, then either we can deploy our time doing something that has 20% impact, or we can deploy our time doing something that has 60% impact. And if I asked you, which of the two I should choose, then when I put it this way, all say that we should always go for the 60% impact. And yet we often in our day-to-day lives, when we are even giving our charitable time, fi sabilillah, we are spending it doing the 20%. And that is really due to one key reason, and that is that we are not thoughtful about our religion. We're not thoughtful about our practice, and we're not thoughtful about how we are going to maximize our ajr. And so, if there's one action point that I want to leave us all with, it is that we should be super thoughtful about where we give to, how we give, and the time that we give as well. All of these things need to come together. And then the one other action point that I wanted to share is that, going back to the point about harm outweighing the benefit. There will be things in our life that we justify it to ourselves as something that is fine for us to do because there's some benefit to it. But we know deep down that actually really it is harmful for us. And so it is that thing that I want us to reflect upon and to try and change and to really try and be honest with ourselves about, so that we can put things in the right order and make sure that where there is harm we avoid it. Unless there's any questions, or Mohsin, unless you've got any other thoughts, then Jazakallah khair, Brother Siraj, for pointing out the National Zakat Foundation is one that does it for locally for UK. That completely agreed with that. That's why we really like National Zakat Foundation. I'll just give a few moments if there's any other questions or comments. We've had some. Oh, there's a question. So with accountancy and auditing as a career, it's with accountancy and auditing, you're auditing and reviewing the financials of companies post fact. So this is after the fact that interest has been dealt with, or they've engaged in some kind of haram activity. And what you're providing is a service, and you're providing a service that is intrinsically not haram, and that is a service of accounting and just preparing their books in order to be submitted to HMRC or to the regulators or wherever they might be submitting it. So that really, in a nutshell, is the reasoning for why accounting would be permissible and auditing would be permissible. However, there are, as you've rightly pointed out, a plethora of views on this. This is our approach to the issue. Now, that is in contrast, for example, to a banking lawyer, where the banking lawyer will actually be drafting up and helping execute and bring about the loan-based transaction. That, to my mind, would not be permissible. So I think on that note, perhaps we should wrap up, unless Mohsin, you have anything else, final words to add.
No, nothing to add. I'm just reflecting on your action points and thinking about how I might bring them into my life. So I've got some deep thinking to do, inshallah.
Allahu Akbar. Well, I'm glad that I've got you away from the recipe videos, at least. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan, everyone, for tuning in. And if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, then please do feel free to do that and share. If you've found this beneficial, then do please feel free to share this with your friends and family. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.